How the economy works. Economic. How the economy machine works in 30 minutes. The economy works like a simple machine, but many people don't understand it or they don't agree on how it works, and this has led to a lot needless economic suffering. I feel a deep sense of responsibility to share my simple but practical economic template. Though it's conventional, it has helped me to anticipate and to study stage for global financial crisis, and it has worked well for me for over 3 years. Let's begin. Thus, the economy works might seem complex. It works in a simple mechanical way. It's made up of a few simple parts and a lot of simple transactions that are repeated over and over again zillion times. These transactions are above all else driven by human nature, and they create three main forces that drive the economy. Number one, productivity growth. Number two, the short-term debit cycle. Number three, the long-term debit cycle. We'll look at these three forces and how laying them on top of each other create a good template for tracking economic movements and figuring out what's happening now. Let's start with the simplest part of the economy, transactions. Transactions. An economy is simply the sum of the transactions that make it up. And a transaction is a very simple thing, You make transactions all the time. Every time you buy something, you create a transaction. Each transaction consists of a buyer exchanging money or credit with the seller for goods, services, or financial assets. Credit spent just like money, so adding together the money spent and the amount of credit spent, you could know the total spending. The total amount of spending drives the economy. If you drive the amount spent by the quantity sold, you get the price. And that's it. That's transaction. It's a building block of the economy machine. All cycles in all processes in an economy are driven by transactions. So if we can understand transactions, we can understand the whole economy. Our market consists of all the buyers and all the sellers making transactions for the same thing. For example, there is a wheat market, a car market, a stock market, and markets for millions of things. An economy consists of all of the transactions in all of its market. If you add up the total spending and the total quantity sold in all the markets, that up everything you need to know to understand the economy. It's just that simple. People, business, banks, and governments all engage in transactions the way I just described, exchanging money and credit for goods, services, and financial assets. The biggest buyer and seller is the government, which consists of two important parts: a central government that collects taxes and spends money, and a central bank, which is different from other buyers and sellers because it controls the amount of money and credit in the economy. It does this influencing interest rate and printing new money. For these reasons, as wealthy, the central bank is an important player in the flow of credit. I want you to pay attention to credit. Credit is the most important part of the economy and probably the least understood. It's the most important part because it's the biggest and most volatile part. Thus, the right buyers and sellers go to the market to make transactions, so they are lenders and borrowers. Lenders usually want money, make their money into more money, and borrowers usually want to buy something they can't afford, like a house or a car. Or they wanted to invest in something like starting a business. Credit can help both lenders and borrowers get what they want. The borrowers promise to repay the amount to borrow, called principal, plus an additional amount called interest. interest. When interest rates are high, there is less borrowing because it's expensive. When interest rates are low, borrowing increases because it's cheaper. When borrowers promise to repay and lenders believe them, credit is created. And two people can agree to create credit out of thin air. That seems simple enough, but credit is tricky because it has different name. As soon as credit is created, it immediately turns into bad. Debt is from an asset to the lender and a liability to the borrower. In the future, when the borrower repays the loan plus interest, the asset and the liability disappear, and the transaction is settled. So why is credit so important? Because when a borrower receives credit, he is able to increase the spending. And remember, spending drives the economy. This is because one person's spending is another person's income. Think about it. Every dollar you spend, someone else earns. And every dollar you earn, someone else has spent. So when you spend more, someone else earns more. When someone's income rises, it makes lenders more willing to lend him money because you know he has more worthy of credit. A credit worth borrower has two things: the ability to repay and collateral. Having a lot of income in relationship to his debt gives him the ability to repay. In the event that he can't repay, he has a valuable asset to use as collateral that can be sold. This makes lenders feel comfortable lending him money. So increases income allows increased borrowing, which allows increases spending. And since one person's spending is another person's income, this leads for more increases borrowing and so on. But this reinforcing pattern leads to economic growth and his is why you have a cycle. But this self-imposing pattern leads to economic growth and is why we have a cycle. In a transaction, you have to give something in order to get something. And how much you get depends on how much you produce. Over time, we learn and accumulate knowledge rises our living standard. We call this productivity growth. Over time, we learn and accumulate latest knowledge raises our living standards. We call productivity growth. Those who are inventive and hardworking raise their productivity and their living standards faster than those who are complacent and lazy. But that isn't necessarily true over the short run. Productivity matters most in the long run, but credit matters most in the short run. This is because productivity growth doesn't fluctuate much, so it's not a big driver of economic swings. That is, because it allows us to consume more than we produce when we crowd it, and it forces us to consume less than we produce when we have to pay back. That swings are into big cycles. One takes about 5 to 8 years, and the other takes about 75 100 years. While most people feel the swings, they typically don't see them as cycle because they see them top to up cycle, to up course day by day, week by week, cross day by day, week by week. In this chapter, we are going to step back and look at these three big processes and how they interacted to make up our experience. As mentioned, the swings around the line are how much innovation or hard work there is. There is primarily to how much credit there is. A reciprocal economy is an economy without credit. In this economy, the only way I can increase my spending is to increase my income, which require me to be more productive and more work. And the more work increases productivity is the only way for growth, or anyone else is more productive. Since my spending is another person's income, the economy grows every time I run your analysis more productive. If we follow the transactions that play this out, we see a progression like the productivity grow right. But because we borrow, we have cycle. This is due to rules regulation. It's due to human nature and the way that credit works. Think of borrowing as simply a way of pulling spending forward. In order to buy something you can't afford, you need to spend more than you make. To do this, you essentially need to borrow from your future self. In doing so, you create a time in the future. Then you need to spend less than you make in order to pay it back. Very quickly resembles a cycle. Basically, at any time you borrow, you create cycle. This is true for an individual as it is for the economy. This is why understanding credit is so important because it's into motion a mechanical, predictable series of events that will happen in the future. This makes credit different from money. Money is the one you settle transactions with. When you buy a beer from a bartender with cash, the transaction is settled immediately. But when you buy a beer with credit, it's like starting a beer bartender. You're saying your promise to pay in the future. Together, you and the bartender create the asset and liability. You just create credit out of thin air. It's not only you pay the bartender later that the asset and the liability disappear. The debt goes away and the transaction is zero. The reality is that most of what people call money is actual credit. The total amount of credit in the United States is about $50 trillion, and the total amount of money is only about $3 trillion. Remember, in an economy without credit, the only way to increase your spending is to produce more. But in an economy with credit, you can also increase your spending by borrowing. As a result, an economy with credit has more spending and allows incomes to rise faster than productivity over the short run, but not over the long run. No, don't get me wrong. Credit is necessarily something bad that just causes cycles. It's bad when it finances overconsumption that can't be paid back. However, it's good when it efficiently allocates resources and produces income so you can pay back the debt. For example, if you borrow money to buy a big TV, if it does not generate income for you to pay back the debt, but you borrow money to buy a tractor, that tractor lets you harvest more crops and earn more money. Then you can pay back your debt and improve your living standard. In an economy with a credit, we can follow the transaction and see how credit create growth. Let me give you an example. Suppose you are $100,000 a year and have a bad. Your credit worth enough to borrow $10,000, say on credit card. So you can spend $110 even though you only earn $100,000. Since your spending is another person's income, someone is earning $110. The person earning $110 with no debt and can borrow $11,000. So he can spend $121 even though he has only earned $110. His spending is another person's income, and by following the transactions, we can begin to see how this process works in a self-reinforcing pattern. But remember, borrowing creates cycles. And if the cycle goes up, it eventually needs to come down. This leads to us into short-term debt cycle. As the economy activity increases, we see an expansion. The first of the short-term debt cycle, spending continues to increase and prices start to rise. This happens because the increases in spending is fueled by credit, which can be created instantly out of thin air. When the amount of spending is incomes grow faster than production of goods, prices rise. When prices rise, we call this inflation. The central bank doesn't want too much inflation because it causes problems. Seeing prices rise, it raises interest rates. With higher interest rate, fewer people can afford to borrow money, and the cost of existing debt rise. Think about this as the monthly payments on your credit card going up. Because people borrow less and have higher debt payments, they have less money left over to spend, so spending is low. And since one person's spending is another person's income, incomes drop, and so on and so forth. When people spend less, prices go down. We call this deflation. Economic activity decreases, and we have a recession. If the recession becomes too severe and inflation is no longer a problem, the central bank will lower interest rates to cause everything to pick up again. With long interest rates, the repayments are reduced and borrowing and spending pick up. And we see another expansion. As you can see, the economy works like a machine. In the short-term debt cycle, spending is concentrated only by the willingness of the lenders on borrower to provide and receive credit. When credit is easily available, there's an economic expansion. When credit isn't easily available, there's a recession. And note that this cycle is controlled primarily by the central bank. The short-term debt cycle typically lasts 5 to 8 years and happens over and over again for decades. But notice that the bottom and top of each cycle finish with more growth in the previous cycle and with more debt. Why? Because people pursue it. They have an inclination to borrow and spend more instead of paying back debt. It's human nature. Because of this, over long periods of time, debt rises faster than incomes, create the long-term debt cycle. Despite people becoming more indebted, lenders even more free extend credit. Why? Because everyone thinks things are going great. People are just focused on what's been happening lately. And what's been happening lately? Incomes have been rising. Asset values are going up. The stock market loses its boom. It pays to buy goods, services, and financial assets with borrowed money. When people run out of debt, we call it a bubble. So even though debt have been growing, incomes have been growing near as fast to offset them. Let's call the ratio of debt to income the debt burden. So long as incomes continue to rise, the debt burden stays manageable. At the same time, asset value is lower. People borrow huge amounts of money to buy assets investment, causing their prices to rise even higher. People feel wealthy. So even the accumulation of a lot of debt, rising incomes and set of value help borrowers remain create worth for a long time. But this obviously cannot continue forever and it doesn't. Over big debt case, debt burden slowly increases, creating larger and larger debt repayments. At some point, debt repayments start growing faster than incomes, forcing people to cut back on their spending. And since the person's spending is another person's incomes begin to go down, which makes the people less creditworthy, causing borrowing to go down. Debt repayments continue to rise, which makes spending drop even further, and the cycle reverses itself. This is the long-term debt peak. Debt burden have simply become too big for the United States, Europe, and much of the rest of the world. This happened in 2008. It happened for the same reason it happened in Japan 1998 and in the United States back in 1929. It happened for the same reason it happened in Japan in 1989 and in the United States back in 1929. And now the economy begins deleveraging. In the deleveraging, people cut spending. It comes for credit disappear. As the price drop, banks get squeezed. The stock market crashes. Social tensions rise and the whole thing starts to feed on itself the other way. As incomes fall and debt repayments rise, borrower gets squeezed. The longer credit drives up, and borrowers can no longer borrow enough money to make their debt repayments. Scrambling to fill this hole, borrowers are forced to sell assets, to rush to sell assets for the market. at the same time as spending for. This is when the stock market collapses. The real estate market ends and banks get into trouble as the prices drop. The value of the collateral borrowers can put up drops. This makes borrowers even less creditworthy. People feel poor, credit literally despair. Less spending, less income, less work, less credit, less borrowing, and so on. And so on. It's a vicious cycle. This appears similar to a recession, but difference here is the interest rate can be lower to save the debt. In a recession, lowering interest rates works to stimulate borrowing. However, in a deleveraging lowering, However, in a deliberating, growing interest rate does the works because interest rates are already low and should hit 0%, so the stimulation ends. Interest rate in the United States hit 0% during the deleveraging of the 1930s and again in 2008. The difference between a recession and deleveraging is that in a deleveraging, borrowers' debt burdens have simply gotten too big and can be relieved by lowering interest rates. Lenders realize that debt have become too large to ever to be paid back. Borrowers have lost their ability to repay, and their collateral has lost value. They feel crippled by the debt. They don't even want more. Lenders stop lending, borrowers stop borrowing. Think of the economy as being not creditworthy, just like in individual. So what do you do about the leveraging? The problem is that burdens are too high and they must come down. There are four ways this can happen. 1. People, business, and governments cut their spending. 2. That are reduced toward default and restructuring. 3. Wealth is reduced from the haves to the have-nots. And finally, 4. The central bank prints new money. These four ways have happened in every deleveraging modern history. Usually spending is cut first. As a result, so people, businesses, and even government to tighten their belts and cut their spending so that they can pay down their debt. This is often referred to as austerity, and borrowers stop taking on your debt and start paying down your debt. You might expect the debt burden to decrease, but the opposite happens because spending is cut, and a man's spending is another man's income. It causes incomes to fall. Therefore, first out that debt are repaid, and the debt burden actually gets worse. As we've seen, this cut in spending is deflationary and painful. Businesses are forced to cut costs, which means less jobs and higher employment. This leads to the next step. Debt must be reduced. Many borrowers find themselves unable to repay their loans, and a borrower's debt are rendered assets. When a borrower doesn't repay the bank, people get nervous that the bank won't be able to repay them, so they rush to withdraw their money from the bank. Banks get squeezed, and people, business, and banks default on their debt. This severe economic contraction is a depression. A big part of the depression is people discovering much of what they thought was their world isn't really there. Let's go back to the bar. When you bought a beer and put it in a bar tab, you promise to repay the bartender. You promise become his asset outside of the bartender. But if you break your promise, if you don't pay him back and essentially default on your bar tab, then the asset he has is really worth anything. It has the basically disappeared. When renters don't want their asset to disappear and agree to debt restructuring. Debt restructuring means renters get paid back less or get paid back over a longer time frame or a lower interest rate than was first agreed. Somehow a contract is broken in a way that reduces of debt. Lenders would rather have a little of something than all of nothing. Even though debt disappears, the restructuring causes income and asset values to disappear faster, so the debt burden continues to get worse. Like hoarding spending, debt reduces so also painful and deflationary. All of this impacts of the central government because lower incomes and less employment means the government collects fewer taxes. At the same time, it needs to increase its spending because employment has risen. Many of the unemployed have indicated savings and need financial support from the government. Additionally, government has created stimulus plans and increases their spending to make up for the decreases in the economy. Government budget deficits explode in the deleveraging because they spend more than they earn in taxes. This is what's happening when you hear about the deficit budget deficit on the news. To fund their deficit, governments need to either raise taxes or borrow money. But with incomes falling and some money employed, who is the money going to come from? The rich. Since government needs more money and since the world is heavily constrained in handling a small percentage of the people. Since government needs more money and since the wealth is heavily concentrated in the hands of a small percentage of the people, governments need to raise taxes on the wealthy, which facilitates a redistribution of wealth in the economy, from the haves to the have-not. But have-not, who are suffering, begin to resent the world has. The world has being squeezed by the weak economy. Falling asset prices and higher taxes begin to resent the have-not. If a depression continues, a social discord can break out. Not only to tension rise within countries, they can rise between countries, especially better incredible countries. This situation can lead to political change that sometimes be extreme. In the 1930s, this led to Hitler coming to power, war in Europe, and its pressure in the United States. The pressure to do something to and the depression increases. Remember, most of what people do was money were actually credit. So when credit is fierce, people don't have enough money. People are this fear for money, and remember. People are this fear for money, and you remember who can print money. The central bank can. Having already lowered its interest rates to near zero, it's forced to print money. Unlike cutting spending, debt reduction, and wealth redistribution, printing money in inflationary and stimulus, and enabling the central bank prints new money out of the air and use it to buy financial assets and government bonds. It happened in the United States during the Great Depression, and again in 2008 when the United States Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, printed over $2 trillion. There are other central banks around the world that could print a lot of money too by buying financial assets. With this money, it helps drive asset prices, which makes people more creditworthy. However, this only helps those who want financial assets. You see, the central bank can print money, but it can only buy financial assets. The central government, on the can buy goods and services and put money in the hands of the people, but it can't print money. So, in order to stimulate the economy, it must cooperate. By bank government, bonds the central bank as essentially lend the money to government. By buying government bonds, the central bank essentially lends the money to the government, allowing to into the loan or despite increases spending on goods and services through its stimulus programs and employment benefits. This increases people's incomes as well as the government's debt. However, it will lower the economy's total debt burden. This is a very risky time. Policymakers need to balance the poor ways that debt burdens come down. The deflationary wave needed to balance with the inflationary waves to order to maintain stability. If balanced correctly, there can be beautiful deleveraging. You see, a deleveraging can be ugly or it can be beautiful. How can I deleveraging beautiful? Even though deleveraging is a difficult situation, handling a difficult situation in the best possible way is beautiful, a lot more beautiful than the depthful unbalanced excess at the deleveraging pace. In a beautiful deleveraging, debt decline relative to income. Economic growth is positive, and inflation is the problem. It is achieved by having the right balance. The right balance requires a certain mix of cutting spending, reducing debt, transferring wealth, and printing money so that economy and social stability can be maintained. People ask if printing money will last inflation. It won't if it accepts foreign credit. Remember, spending is one matter. A dollar of spending paid for with money has the same effect on prices as dollars of spending paid for with credit. A dollar of spending paid for with money has the same effect on prices as a dollar of spending paid for with credit. By printing money, the central bank can make up for this difference of credit with an increase in the amount of money. In order to turn things around, the central bank needs to not a form of income growth, but get the rate of income growth higher than the rate of interest of the accumulated debt. So what do I mean by that? Basically, income needs to grow faster than debt grows. For example, let's assume that the country going through a deleveraging has a debt to income ratio of 100%. That means that the amount of debt it has is the same as the amount of income the entire country makes in a year. Now think about the interest rate on the debt. Let's say 2%. If debt is growing at 2% because of the interest rate and income is only growing at around 1%, you will never reduce the debt burden. You need to print enough money to get the rate income grow about the rate of interest. However, printing money could easily be abused because it's so easy to and people perfect it to the alternatives. The key is to avoid printing too much money, causing unacceptably high inflation, the way Germany did during its deleveraging in the 1920s. If policymakers achieve the right balance, a deleveraging is just so dramatic. Growth slow, but debt burdens go down. That's the beautiful deleveraging. When incomes begin to rise, borrowers begin to appear more creditworthy. And when borrowers appear more creditworthy, lenders begin to lend money again. Debt burdens finally begin to fall. Able to borrow money, people can spend more. Eventually, the economy begins to grow again, leading to the replacement powers of the long-term debt cycle. Though the deleveraging process can be horrible if handled badly. If handled well, it will eventually fix the problem. It takes roughly a decade or more for debt burdens to fall in economic activities to takes roughly a decade or more for debt burdens to foreign economic activity to get back more to normal has them lost decay. In closing, of course, the economy is a little bit more complicated than this template suggests. However, rank the short-term debt cycle on top of the long-term debt cycle and the living and laying both of them on top of productivity goal line gives a reasonable good template for seeing where we've been, where we are now, and where we probably have. So in summary, there are three rules of thumb that I'd like you to make away from this. First, don't have debt rise faster than income because your debt burdens will eventually crush you. Second, don't have income rise faster than productivity because you will eventually become uncompetitive. And third, you do all that you can to raise your productivity because in the long run that's what matters most. This is simple advice for you and it's a simple advice for policymakers. You might be surprised, but most people, including most policymakers, don't pay enough attention to this. This temporary work for me, and I hope it will work for you. Thank you.